All right, everybody, it's 12:05 here on the East Coast. Thank you all for coming. I'm Rob Manfredi, President of Bamboo Solutions. We're trying something a little different with our webinars today, and I'm excited to have with me Amit Patel from the Mythos Group. The Mythos Group is an amazing consulting organization that is out of San Francisco. They're boutique in nature, but really work with companies on strategic transformation for those organizations. And Amit and I have been friends forever, it seems. He is the founder and managing consultant of Mythos Group. Amit is an innovative strategist, certified organizational change practitioner, and an organizational transformation executive that has been working in this space for 20 years. He has led a variety of global business transformations for Fortune 100, 500, and other startup companies. He and I were talking a couple weeks ago just about the impacts of COVID and what we're seeing in the marketplace, and I found it very intriguing, his insights. He had published several white papers on this subject recently, and I thought between the white papers and the conversation that the material would be pertinent to our Bamboo community. So we decided to have an informal chat based on some topics that we felt were important. We hope you find the information actionable, insightful, and of course, something that will help us prepare for the changes that have happened and how we're going to deal with it as organizations moving forward. So with that, I want to welcome Amit Patel to the webinar.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Rob.
Absolutely. So we titled this webinar Reimagining the Workplace because what I'm seeing with our customers is that they are struggling with what is the new normal, and that there was a wait and see attitude of when are we going to get back to what it was. So we're not spending money, we're holding off on projects. This is all still real important for us, but let's see how things play out, and then as an organization we're going to figure out a strategy. Obviously everybody adopted remote working, we've got Zoom videos, we've got team usage going, but for actual business processes and the like, there was a, geez, what do we do? How do we what is it going to be like? And what I wanted to start with is what are we seeing in the market overall, outside of my experience with our customers, but you from a more global, larger look.
Yeah, and as you alluded to, Rob, the COVID-19 pandemic has touched each and every one of us across the world. The pandemic has created an unprecedented global humanitarian and economic crisis. Businesses are struggling in terms of how to deal with uncertainty, how do they put the lights back on, and more importantly, how do they bring back employees to the workplace, ensuring their safety, well-being, and productivity. Mm-hmm. You know, let's just take a look at the macro level at how broad this pandemic is. It's interesting. I'll bring out some interesting statistics published by the International Labour Organization. It was an April publication that highlighted 3 key findings that I found very interesting. The first one is that this pandemic and economic crisis has touched upon the entire global workforce comprising of 3.2 billion people. Full or partial lockdowns measures have impacted 2.7 billion people. That's 81%. Now think about it for a minute. That's over 4 out of every 5 employees is impacted by these lockdowns. Furthermore, what is really illuminating is that due to the reduction in the work hours in the global workforce, 1.6, that is half the global workforce, is in jeopardy of losing their jobs and livelihoods completely. Now let's take a look at it from the US perspective. There was a publication made by Business Insider in August that indicated that over the past 23 weeks, we have 58 million people filing for unemployment. In the last 2 weeks in August, there were 2 additional or 1 million per week new cases filed. Now, needless to say, this is a very gloomy outlook. So what has the government and other entities doing in order to address this? To alleviate this global economic crisis, each country has taken upon itself to come up with some economic stimulus packages. According to a UN report published in June, over $3 trillion have been spent thus far in supporting workers and industries. In the US, as some of you may recall, in March 27, 2020, we passed the CARES Act, which infused $2.2 billion into the US economy. Having said all of that, what does this mean for businesses, individuals, whether they're small companies, startups, or Fortune 500? We see 3 trends emerging out of this. One trend, or the first one, is companies that had invested significantly in digitization of their processes and getting early on the digital strategy transformation journey are doing well. They have been minimally impacted by this economic crisis. For example, Amazon. As a matter of fact, Amazon's business is booming. Netflix is another good example of it. The other trend that we see is that companies are taking time to pause, reassess, rethink, and reimagine how business is done. They're identifying new ways of doing business through creating new models, leveraging the latest emerging technologies such as AI, robotics, big data, cloud computing, etc. An example of this is the hospitality business. It already started prior to the pandemic, but has accelerated its adoption, is contactless check-in and checking out. Another application of this industry, or an industry rethinking its business model, is the healthcare industry, where you now see the prevalence of telemedicine. Last but not least, as you alluded to, Rob, are companies that are sitting on the sideline, taking a wait-and-see approach. They want to see how their competitors within the industry are going to deal with these challenges. And unfortunately for those organizations, if they continue doing that and freeze up spending money on projects that are needed, they're going to be sitting on the sideline for a long time. The recovery is going to be longer, and perhaps they even lose market share and revenue.
Well, let's talk about that. So you kind of painted a good picture overall, and I think the UN stated that there were over $10 trillion spent, not $3 trillion, and in the US it was about 2.2 trillion.
Right.
Trillion, not billion. Okay, so lots of money being pumped in. Is that pushing the inevitable out? That things that would fall apart 3 months ago are now going to fall apart now? I think we're seeing some of that failure happen for companies that were holding on to maybe outdated business models or outdated service models on how customers wanted to work. To me, COVID is the change agent for technology, being very technology centric. That has already happened. It's not a wait and see that change is coming. The change has happened, and our reaction to it today as organizations and companies is going to define whether we succeed in the coming economy or we go the way of some of those, brick and mortar places that did not get to click and mortar, to use an old phrase from the 90s, right? So what I want to start talking about with the audience, and by the way, just from a housekeeping standpoint, you do have the ability to ask questions. We have Kevin Townsend on the line manning the questions, and we'll try to answer them either within the webinar or get to you afterwards. So as we get into some of these more actionable items, please raise your hand and ask a question. We'd love to hear from you. But taking that broad view that you could look as doom and gloom or opportunity or just the effects of change that's happening so fast, how do we prioritize change? And what are the things that we need to focus on, your top 3 items for what we should focus on in change, and then we'll dive into each of those topics.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail. As companies as the lockdown restrictions are lifted, organizations and businesses are reopening, and they have a daunting task of figuring out what to prioritize in order to make sure that their workforce feels safe coming into work. This also gives them an opportunity to rethink how they do business. And here are three key things that they need to focus on as they start thinking about opening up their businesses. First is, what action do they need to take in order to keep the workplace safe? That is of paramount importance. The second one is, who do you bring back, when and why? Lastly, but not least, is how does work get done?
Right. So, you know, obviously we've talked about these topics before, so I've got a slide for each of these, and I think it would be good to dive into each of those three topics to talk about it. And, you know, we've had lots of customers come to us to help build out the portals in SharePoint so that their remote workforce can better collaborate, better work together. But the projects feel reactionary. They feel like a Band-Aid to get us through this. I'm not yet seeing from our customers this is our 3-year strategy to use collaboration tools, again, being Microsoft centric, like SharePoint and Azure and Teams, to recreate the workplace, to recreate our workforce, and to recreate how work gets done. So this, I think, would be interesting from a more consultant standpoint. What should they be focusing on with workplace-based safety as the first priority for change?
You know, there was a recent study done by PwC where they polled 1,000 employees in June, and they asked them, what measures do their organization need to take in order for them to feel comfortable to come back to the workplace? Here are some revealing facts, you know, the top 5, and I'm paraphrasing and making them concise. The first one was 47% of those polled wanted changes in workplace safety. 45% wanted the customers to follow safety and hygiene practices, and this is more applicable to the, you know, the healthcare industry, hospitality industry, etc., retail industry. 44% wanted communications to be ongoing in terms of what happens if COVID-19 rises, internally within the company and then also externally as a community. 42% wanted mandatory checks upon return, you know, whether they're temperature checks or quick 15-minute COVID testing. And then 35% wanted contact tracing, so that if a real contact, let me try that again, real-time contact tracing for employees, so that if somebody tested positive, they were notified.
Right.
Right.
Right. So that to me, it sounds like, you know, when we say 47 or 50%, that's a big number, right? So that's like everybody. They want a safe place to work, and they want the interaction with customers to be safe as well. In other words, have customers adhere to safety practices. That makes a lot of sense to me. And even outside of the service industry, I know for me to get on a plane to go visit a customer, which hasn't happened since the lockdown, there's a reluctance to do face-to-face meetings, to have that team building room, and all of that needs to come back. So I think those concepts apply across the board to the enterprise as well as service industries.
Right. So in order to pandemic-proof your workplace, there are certain things that are short-term, certain things that need to be done in terms of long-term upgrades, and then there are new ways of working. But at the heart of all of these changes is keeping hygiene in the workplace as top priority.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah, just as simple as that. You know,
so tell me about things that the organization should consider in creating a safe workplace outside of hygiene. What can they do physically?
Physically, they can start thinking about doing, you know, distributing the office space using a hub and spoke model. You know, typically in the US and in other places, we have a conglomeration of people working in concentrated campuses. Microsoft is prime example, Oracle, so on and so forth, right? Companies have a lot of people coming into a specific office location, centralized office location. By using the hub and spoke model, what you're doing is you're distributing the number of people coming in, you're reducing the number of people coming into the main office, as well as providing flexibility to individuals. You're reducing the chances of somebody actually transmitting the diseases because of fewer people, or the concentration being fewer in these satellite offices, if you will. It also reduces the carbon footprint for those who want to go green, and it also maintains and preserves the cultural corporate culture that you want to maintain, because people do have the ability of socializing and meeting up with either their fellow colleagues or clients at that light office. So you're not losing much by going into this distributed office. The other advantage of going through this is, needless to say, that you now have significant office space, real estate that, in really expensive places like San Francisco, Palo Alto, etc. Here on the West Coast, I'm talking about some of these companies like Cisco and NetApp and Oracle, etc. And I'm sure, there are similar kinds of companies up on the East Coast that you can free up that space and save a significant dollar amount on operating costs.
Right, but obviously we all deal with leases. Let's say you are in a lease and that your long term is to move to a hub and spoke model. What can you do with your existing office space?
You can sublease it or negotiate a way to get out of it by, by early exit.
Yeah, but outside of that, I mean, can we redesign office layouts? Can we look at leveraging new technology?
Yeah. Absolutely. So when you're thinking about bringing things back, you can redesign the office layouts. One of the mandatory things is keeping social distance 6 feet and more. So the office layouts that we see these days have cubes in them. Those will have to be restructured such that the cube space between each cubicle is at least 6 feet apart, if not more. The offices may have to be restructured where you create private offices and huddle rooms to alleviate the exposure that people have of being concentrated in one location.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, let's move on to the second topic then, on who to bring back, right? Where companies are made up of people and team members, and these team members support the customers that want their goods and services. What's changing?
So what's changing is the underlying digital transformation that a lot of these companies were thinking about or were in the process of undertaking. So let's talk a little bit about who to bring back. With the current pandemic, it's pretty imperative that an organization reassesses how business is done and who is important to bring back. So what value does a person bring based upon the role that they're playing to bring back? Can that work be done externally outside the office, or does that work have to be done internally? How do you go about doing that then? Part of redoing that is reclassifying your roles, what each individual does, or what each role does, and what their created value is, whether the role is performed on-site or off-site. And based upon that role, you then realign your organization and break these roles down into 3 distinct categories: fully on-site, hybrid, or fully off-site. Let me give you a little bit of an example of what I mean by fully on-site and the value created there. For instance, in a manufacturing plant, somebody who's doing machining or doing sheet metal work, that body of work can't be, the value of that work can't be shifted to the individual's residence. So they become important to bring back to the office. Let's talk a little bit about hybrid. By hybrid, we mean some of the work can be done, or majority of the work can be done offsite, but there are times and occasions when the person needs to come in to the office. A salesperson, for instance, that role or that would fit into this category, or say, for instance, HR. You could do the interviews by telephone, but at some point you're going to have to meet the new candidate when you have to sign documents and such, and during the onboarding process. And then fully offsite, people like software developers, project managers, executive assistant. This body of work can be done completely offsite. And there are collaborative tools that you can use like Zoom, whiteboards, etc., to help facilitate the teamwork that they need.
So that's interesting. The reclassification roles based on where the worker needs to be to produce the value of their role is a new way to think of roles. And then those that need to be on site for the value to be realized, we have to look at the workplace safety and the interaction with customer safety to help maintain your business continuity. So these are all new challenges, but they're challenges that I would say the digital transformation started 10 years ago, right? When technology became the ability for technology to support a remote workforce. That was not something that was embraced because we all wanted to be together as social beings, right? And I see it with my customers, especially in the federal government, where the team members need to go to DC and they need to be on site, and they're writing code, and they're writing code that's existing in the cloud, so they could be writing code from anywhere. So there was a disconnect between what technology could do and where the physical presence needed to be for that, I guess, comfort level. So COVID is the agent of change that has said, okay, you all need to be remote, figure it out. And we looked around and we said, there's all this technology we're already using that can facilitate 70% of the roles within an organization to not actually be together, but still feel together. So, go on.
Let me also add to that, that another new concept that's coming up, which is not all that new, Rob, which is staggered schedules and rotational days. And what that does is it reduces the volumes of employees that need to be in the office, minimize the spread of the coronavirus, and helps maintain business continuity. So this is another concept, not a new concept per se, but a new thought that is getting a lot of weight. In executive.
We're seeing, and it's I don't want to say that this is the truth forever, because every sort of benefit, there is a cost to it. But with our remote teams for our federal clients, their productivity is actually increasing in terms of output. And that could be due, there's no longer an hour-and-a-half commute into DC, right? There's no longer setting up. There's no longer sort of ad hoc meetings to distract you from coding, right? But there is obviously some sort of social cost, some sort of, they always said in startups, right? You put them together because the brilliance happens in those bump into conversations or those impromptu chats of, I'm working on this problem. Somebody goes, I just solved that problem, right? So replicating that in a virtual world is a challenge that I think we can overcome. But early results from a remote workforce where the benefits of the role can be observed as they're remote they're getting more done. They're getting more done. They're logging on earlier and checking email, before the kids get ready for their virtual schools. They're, getting dinner ready and then checking, finishing up that piece of code that's bugging them in their head because they've got their work computer at home now, right? So, it's not like working more, it's just being able to work in a way that isn't tied to a commute and return schedule that we're seeing. But let's talk about that change, right? So how work gets done. We've just started touching on that, but I know you've got some pretty good stats on what's happening in this, how work is getting done.
Sure. As you set up the premise here, the COVID-19 crisis has prompted organizations to reassess, rethink, reconstruct how work gets done. By examining each business process, and by that I mean what is done, how it's done, where it's done, when it's done, and who does it, an organization has the ability to bring efficiencies into the process and at the same time maintain organizational, cultural elements intact. It becomes very important for people to have a corporate culture and a sense of belonging, and by re-examining it this way, they have the ability of doing so. One of the things that how work gets done is these days remote work, right? The rabbit out of the bag, as you alluded to, this is now gradually becoming the norm. Gartner CEO report published in April indicated that 74% of the CEOs will make remote work permanent.
Wow.
74%. Okay, so that is 3/4 of the CEOs will make remote work permanent. It is becoming the new norm and the new way of working. There was a similar study done by Boston Consulting Group in August where they polled 12,000 employees from US, Germany, India in late July, published the results in August, obviously, that stated they were just as effective, if not their productivity increased in the early months of the pandemic. So this supports what you're seeing, Rob, in your with your federal clients, where the productivity has increased. This how work gets done obviously also begs the question in terms of new career paths and upskilling your employees. Not everybody is digitally savvy, so there will be a little bit of a learning curve to bring some of them on board. But once they understand the new digital office productivity tools, they all agree in general that their productivity has increased. They enjoy the work-life balance that they enjoy, that this provides them, and the flexibility of doing work. It's not that you're stuck at your office for 8 hours a day. They can piecemeal the work as needed and balance their other personal needs. Digital transformation is a big thing in how work gets done. This is an opportunity for organizations to reimagine how manual processes can be digitalized. I can give you a couple of examples that really are very interesting. In Anheuser-Busch, right? They have created an application leveraging new emerging technologies such as Internet of Things to create connected breweries. Now, instead of having somebody who's a brewmaster who checks up each batch of the brew to make sure for consistency, quality, etc., these machines and other gadgets that they have are capable of doing that. Needless to say, saving them significant amount of money, time, and energy. For them, and for them, I mean Anheuser-Busch, the digital transformation is just not internal. They have extended it out to the 4 million retailers and partners and everybody in between. So now they've actually created a mobile application called B2B that actually helps them in terms of replenishing supplies. The app is available to store owners, convenience owners, and other retailers where they can key in what they want to replenish. There's AI and other algorithms behind it that make suggestions. And what this also does is it frees up time for the sales rep to go and get better acquainted with these retailers. To educate them on the products and the services that Anheuser-Busch offers, and to solicit their input in terms of what they'd like to see new in the product. So it becomes a win-win situation for everybody. Another example how digital transformation is touching upon customers, right? You know, we all have been in lockdown. Typically, you know, if you go down to a Neiman Marcus or a high-end boutique store, you get the personalized services in terms of suggestions, etc., etc. I know when I was going to Nordstrom's, there was a young lady who would put together, a package of clothes or suits for me to look at, and she based upon my preferences and previous purchases. Now, unfortunately, with COVID, some of these things are not going to be there, and that is the new reality. So how do you leverage digital technology to substitute that? Michael Kors recently released a series of live stream sessions and short video clips to introduce their new range of customizable handbags. Then they followed these broadcasts with other digital experiences, including a digital quiz, which would then result in this particular application providing you with recommendations of the color and style of the handbag that you would like.
Right. Yep. It's mass customization. It's what we're used to now. It's what the customers expect when making a selection. That the choices are there at their fingertips. That communication is constant and pervasive.
Right. And the thing is that, through cloud computing, AI, big data analytics, et cetera, you're able to profile the customer in a totally different way, right? It all becomes about customer and digital. More than customer experience, it becomes more about the digital experience that the customer experiences.
Right. Right. Well, we talk about the changes that are being made, and these are not changes that have happened since COVID. There are organizations like Neiman Marcus and others that have embraced technology as a way to work with their customers. And I know you've worked with lots of companies to help them identify areas to change first. But as it relates to COVID, there's going to be a vaccine, and there's going to be effective treatments and quick testing, and hopefully this thing will be no more than a bad flu. I don't think it's ever going to go away, but we will, just like any other vector, will manage it. So that gets to this topic: is when we have a treatment and vaccines, is this all moot? Is this going to go back to normal? And these changes we're making with leases and hub and spoke and 6-foot wide desks, and what will stick and stay?
Now, so let's talk about the vaccine for a minute, as a diversion. Lots of countries are actually trying to come up with a vaccine, US being one of them, Germany, India, Russia, China, to name a few. Companies like Moderna, Pfizer, BioNTech, Oxford University, AstraZeneca, all are working towards actually getting a vaccine. Now, the timeline of when this vaccine is going to be made available to the general public is up for debate, and when the actual vaccine is available is going to be up for debate as well. Some say it will be available in November, December. However, the reality is that it won't be available for the general public until late 2021. That is per the Guardian CDC director. So that's what has been mentioned just yesterday.
Sure. The timelines are all over the place.
Right, and then according to the National Academy of Science, they have this draft plan of who and when people can get vaccinated. They're indicating that even if a vaccine is produced mainstream, it won't be available mainstream until mid-2021.
Right.
So the reality is that this is not something that's going to go away. It's not a flu, and what changes are being made are going to be made for good. There's no going back. So if people think, okay, I'm going to go back to the old ways of doing business, I think they're in for a rude awakening, right?
So let's talk about that, right? So going back, so let's say even if the vaccine came out in November, as some promise, and we do get vaccinated and we have effective treatments, regardless, there's no going back. This is a new way that companies need to compete for attention from the market.
Absolutely, and Rob, organizations that are further ahead in their digital transformation strategy journey, they will be further ahead, and the gap between them and those who have not started on the journey is only going to increase, right?
Right.
Those who have started the digital transformation journey, there's an added advantage is that they will be agile enough to future-proof themselves from similar kinds of pandemics or economic crises in the future, whereas those who haven't started yet are not going to have that luxury.
Right.
The bottom line is that the economic crisis created by the COVID-19 pandemic has become an accelerated change agent for digital transformation, and organizations and consumers are gradually, majority of them are adopting
Yep.
that trend.
Yep. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And that was one of the key takeaways from our conversation. And something I believe is that this is a change agent, not a bump in the road. And technology and consumer behavior and worker behavior will not go back to the way it was, for safety and for service and convenience. And we see companies thriving and growing and hiring, and we see companies unfortunately closing their doors. But we saw this same thing happen in the late 90s with the move to just internet. Right, with Amazon versus Barnes and Nobles is the one that always comes to mind, right?
Or you can take another example is Netflix and what was it, Blockbuster.
Correct, right? And even Netflix was delivering DVDs as an internet company, right? Until the streaming service caught up, but they were changing the paradigm. So I think, you know, for us, and as we sort of get to the end of this, what type of advice for companies do you have that are listening today? And then what I do want to say is we have a PowerPoint with a lot of these statistics that we're talking about that we're going to share with our team members. I do want you to talk about how they can get access to your white papers that you've written on a lot of the topics that we've presented today. And then we'll talk about, you know, how to use the Mythos Group and Bamboo for this digital transformation.
Fantastic. So change is never easy, right? You know, whether it's individual change or organizational change, it's never easy. However, from a business perspective, the current economic crisis mandates organizations to reimagine how they do business and reconstruct how they do business. So there are three fundamental questions that they need to ask themselves. Who do we want to be? What's our North Star going to look like, right? What's the guiding light for us moving forward? What they want to do, you know, so what's our mission now moving forward? And then how do we do it? You know, what are the operational and support mechanisms that we need in order to get this going? And obviously digital transformation will be a key cog in that wheel. The advice I have for companies that are listening in today is that by partnering, you know, by getting an outside opinion and by partnering with management consulting companies such as my company, you get an unbiased perspective and assessment of where you are today, what challenges you're facing, and collaboratively, we can create a roadmap that enables you to put together a digital transformation strategy that not only helps you alleviate today's crises, but also future-proofs you for potential challenges that lie ahead. Rob, on the technology side, perhaps you may want to add a word or two.
Yeah, so I think it's the what do we do? Management consulting groups can help provide that guiding light. What we're seeing are companies that know what they want to change, at least from a technology standpoint. And we're finding with that bubble of effort that the understanding of how all these technologies within Office 365 work together, that we can help those companies rapidly make and implement those changes through our consulting services team. The Office 365 stack, which now includes everything from Azure to SharePoint to tools like Power Automate, Power BI, to teams and the automation between teams and project rollouts, all of that stuff gets complicated fast, but the business needs are critical. So relying on somebody like our group to help provide the implementation and architecture services can really help speed the way to a more productive workforce.
Rob, you know, let me also add, you mentioned about the white papers and where they could find them, right? So
Yep.
The white papers have been published on my website, mythosgroupinc.com. I've also written a series of articles titled Reimagine, and I've posted them on LinkedIn. The first series of articles in the Reimagining series is about global value change and, you know, things that it's disrupted. The second series is all about the workplace safety. Third is about retail business and how COVID-19 is impacting them and what post-COVID-19 would look like, the norm. And the last but not the least is leadership resiliency. You need that right now more than ever. I'm also in the process of writing some articles about change and how organizations need to think about change as they deal with COVID-19 and start reimagining the post-COVID-19 new normal.
For sure. Well, Amit, I want to thank you for your time today and your insights on this. And I don't believe this will be our last on topics related to change. As a company, we are in the midst of change with our customers from a technology standpoint, and your global insights are really refreshing to add a direction and guidance on a macro sense for what we do every day.
And as always, a pleasure, Rob, collaborating with you, yeah?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you all for attending. We'll send out the deliverables we spoke about, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much all. Take care.
Thank you.